What are some horrifying things that have happened to you that could have a plausible explanation but still freak you out? Story 1. A few years back, I lived with my mother and German Shepherd in a two-bedroom rented townhouse. I got home from work one day and went about my daily routine. When it came time to eat dinner, I knocked on my mom's door to tell her to come and eat. I smelled cigarette smoke and heard her grunt of response. So I went back downstairs and ate alone. I figured I would just put a plate away for her. Fast forward to about 2 a.m., I was awoken by someone holding my hand and gently shaking it. I immediately shot straight up and looked around. My dog, who is overly protective and sleeps with me every single night, wasn't in bed. She wasn't even in the room. She was definitely on my bed when I went to sleep. I sleep with the bedroom door shut and locked. She was scratching at my closed and locked bedroom door from the hallway. Frantic. I bolted for the door, let her in, and she started searching the whole room. I began yelling for my mother. No answer. I forced my dog to walk down the hallway with me. I still smelled cigarette smoke. I banged on my mom's door. No answer, so I just opened it. She wasn't even home. The bed was made and her TV was off. My dog and I searched the entire house. Nothing was out of place. All the doors and windows were still locked. I was freaked out, to say the least. The next day I called my mom and she told me she had left early the day before to visit my sick grandfather. Story 2. I used to have a penchant for wandering around abandoned buildings when I was in high school. One time a friend and I decided it would be a good idea to explore a farmstead that hadn't been in use for years. The whole experience was really bizarre. The farmstead was accessible by a long gravel road that led to a cluster of dilapidated buildings around a central barn. We parked at the end of the gravel road near the turnoff to the main road so we could walk around the property and leave quickly later. We went into the barn first and found deer bones arranged in a circle around the skull and a bunch of blankets and wood stacked in a corner of the room. We thought it was really cult-like and weird, noped out, and started walking back to the car. Halfway down the gravel road, we heard crunching, heavy footsteps and someone screeching behind us. Blood-curdling, screeching. We sprinted back to my car and tried to peel out of there as fast as possible, but it had snowed the night before, and my back tire was stuck in a puddle of melted snow. My friend was screaming because she was so freaked out but wouldn't turn to look at the path behind us. By the time I had gotten the car unstuck, she turned around to see if there was someone following us, and there was no one there. It could have been a bird or something, but we both swear up and down to this day that someone was following us. I actually thought I was going to die that day. Story 3. To preface, I'm a suburban/city guy. I've always lived surrounded by people and lights. A couple of years ago, I visited my ex-mother-in-law in rural Georgia over the summer. We're talking deep, deep rural South. No light pollution, so you can see a billion stars and the actual Milky Way across the sky. Well, the night I went, it was one of those slim crescent moons, so it was even darker than normal. I couldn't see my hand at the end of my outstretched arm. It was that dark. I was walking their little dog around the yard along the edge of a forest, probably 200 yards from their trailer, which was the only source of light besides my flashlight. This little dog stopped dead in his tracks and started trembling. He looked up at me with his bug eyes popping out. I heard a rustle of leaves and a twig snap, maybe 20 feet to my left. I scooped the dog up and started power walking back to the house, looking in all directions with the flashlight. Once I got halfway back, I heard a blood-curdling, high-pitched scream from hell. It sounded like a woman being attacked. I panicked. This felt like something out of a horror movie, and I thought I was done for. I ran as fast as I could back to the trailer. My ex-mother-in-law told me it was probably a bobcat. Apparently, they scream like that all the time. Story 4. This one is kind of creepy, but also kind of comforting. This story was told to me by my grandmother, who is a no-nonsense kind of woman, so I believe every word of it. My grandma had a neighbor and friend who unfortunately lost her husband when she was young, about 40 years ago. It was a sudden death, cardiac arrest or something like that. She was very upset because, for a couple of years after his death, she couldn't dream about him. For some reason, it really bothered her that she couldn't experience a dream with him in it. It was like she wanted it for comfort. Anyway, some time passed, and this woman was preparing to sell her house and move closer to her kids. They lived a state over. Suddenly, she got her wish. She started dreaming, and her husband was in them. She had multiple dreams, and in each one, her husband would wake her up, sit down on the bed, and start speaking to her. However, his speech horrified her. It was described to me as backwards or garbled. I imagine it was something similar to how the Twin Peaks characters speak in the Black Lodge. It was unsettling. She couldn't understand a single word. A few days before she was about to move out for good, she went to bed and dreamed of him again. The dream was the same, except she understood one word he said. He grabbed her in the dream and repeatedly said rafters, almost seeming panicked. She woke up rattled, but eventually returned to sleep. The next day, as she was finishing packing in the basement, she looked up and saw the rafters. She remembered the dream and felt compelled to reach into them. She did, and pulled out thousands of dollars worth of World War II bonds her husband had purchased without her knowledge. She swears he never told her about them. So he appeared in her dreams to let her know, so she wouldn't leave all those bonds behind when she sold the house. This story still gives me chills today. Story 5. When I was younger, my mom, my grandma, and I liked to go to this little tea shop about 40 miles from our home. It was a cute place where you could get classic tea, sandwiches, and little desserts. One time we went, all was normal, but on the way home we received a call that my other grandma had passed away. It was very sad, but she had been battling cancer, so it wasn't entirely unexpected. The next time we went, a few months later, on the way home, we received a call that my uncle had died suddenly of a heart attack. Creepy coincidence for sure, but we still didn't think too much of it. We went back a third time a few months after that, and once again on the way home, we received the phone call that someone had died. This time it was my grandpa's brother. We never went back to that tea shop again. Now, all of these people were elderly and not exactly in the best of health, so their passing away around the same time wasn't particularly strange. But the fact that 3 separate times we went to that place, 3 people died on the same day, and we received the calls on the drive home, makes me think something about that place was cursed. It has since closed, but I'm still nervous to even go to that area to this day. Story 6. So this is going on as we speak, but let me take you back a couple of months to when this all started. One warm day around late August or early September, I went outside and found this little ball of fur, feathers, and hair with a dangling earring hooked into it on my porch. Weird, I thought. I told my husband there was some strange energy around it and that it freaked me out. I didn't want to touch it, but it needed to go. He suggested it might be a gift from the tomcat next door or something our dog dragged home. Our dog had never done that before, but hey, that explanation made more sense than someone leaving strange things on our porch, cool. Then last week, a fully intact lower jawbone of a white-tailed deer showed up on our porch, in the exact same spot where the first weird thing had been. Again, I asked my husband, and he said maybe the dog brought it. Again, something he had never done, but a logical idea. Still, I wasn't going to touch it. The first object was still fresh in my mind, and if someone was leaving weird stuff on the porch, I wasn't getting involved. Thanks for taking that risk, honey. The jawbone stayed on the porch for a while. Yesterday, I was studying, facing the front door. Around lunchtime, my dog started freaking out. I looked up and saw an older, disheveled-looking woman, I think, on our porch. I had never seen her before. She walked up to our front door, left something on the bench we keep outside, then turned and walked away. After a moment, I got up to grab whatever pamphlet she might have left. Except she didn't leave a pamphlet. She came onto our porch, picked up the jawbone, and moved it onto the bench. Right in the middle of 2 posts on the porch fence, lined up perfectly with a ray of sunlight. So now I'm pretty convinced someone is leaving weird stuff on our porch, and I'm just hoping we're not cursed. Story 7. My friend asked me if I would go to her house after work and feed her dog, as she would not be home until 3 a.m. or so. She worked in a bar. I arrived at her house at 8:30 p.m. and got the key she had left under the mat to unlock the door. Once I unlocked the door, I turned off the alarm and put the key in a white bowl by the door. I am 100% sure I put the key in the bowl. I fed the dog and played with him for a little while, then went to lock up the house again and leave. But the key was gone. Just then, the dog started barking furiously and ran full speed out of the kitchen and up the stairs. He just sat there growling at nothing. The feeling that came over me at that time was so strange. I randomly burst out crying and couldn't stop. Eventually, I calmed down, put the dog back into the kitchen, and looked for the key. It was literally nowhere. I ended up finding another key that worked, so I just locked the house and left. I told my friend, and she looked daily for about a week. Then one day the key was back in the white bowl. Story 8. I've posted this before, but here it is again. The plausible explanation is sleep paralysis, but I've never experienced anything like it before or after this incident. When I was in elementary school, I shared a queen-size bed with my older sister, and our family dog, a mutt that looked like a short-haired lassie, would sleep at the foot of our bed every night. When I was about 6 years old, I woke up one night around midnight and saw a dark figure standing at the foot of the bed. The figure was entirely in black, without any eyes or a face. I tried to wake my sister up, but she rolled over to go back to sleep. My sister must have accidentally kicked the dog, because the dog woke up, raised her head, and started growling at the figure at the foot of the bed. The growling then woke my sister up, and she saw the figure and started screaming. When my parents came into the room and turned the light on, nothing was there. To this day, both my sister and I are adamant that we saw a ghost or some kind of dark presence in our room. We know we aren't imagining it, because the dog saw it too. Story 9. About a year before my son was born, my boyfriend's father died. I had never met my boyfriend's father, but I heard stories of his twisted sense of humor and how he liked to mess with people. My boyfriend was not particularly close with his dad. We lived in North Carolina, and his dad had taken off to Seattle when my boyfriend was young. I don't think my boyfriend really grieved until our son was born, and he realized that his dad would never meet him. That hit him hard. Over the first month of caring for our newborn, we started to notice screws that had fallen out of household items, kitchen chairs, towel rack, screen door, outlet cover, the most random stuff. More than a dozen loose screws in the span of a week. Kind of weird, but we were sleep-deprived parents and didn't really have the mental stamina to waste trying to figure it out. One day we were chilling in the living room and a screw fell out of the light fixture and landed in my boyfriend's lap. He started laughing hysterically, so hard he couldn't breathe. When he finally calmed down enough to tell me what set him off, he held up the screw and said, "I finally get it. My dad is screwing with me." We never had a loose screw again. Story 10. So as a youngster, me and my brother were staying up late playing video games since we didn't have school the next morning. It was maybe 3 a.m. when we decided to shut it down and get in bed. My room was at the end of the hall while my brother's was right next to mine. After we shut it off and put the controllers away, we both heard these heavy, slow footsteps coming from the kitchen. The kitchen was the only room without carpet, so the sounds were pretty ominous. We gave each other a look, and I called out down the hall, "Dad?" Then the footstep sounds trailed back toward our laundry room and stopped. That's also where our basement door was. We knew something wasn't right, so we both started yelling for our mom and dad, and they came rushing to us all sleepy and confused. We frantically explained what we heard. My dad went and checked it out and told us that all the doors were still locked and closed, and there wasn't anything showing anyone was in the house. A plausible explanation could be that it was just a burglar who broke in and ran off when we called out. But I've always wondered, what if it was a ghost instead? Story 11. I used to do hospice home care. People who are actively dying see things. The thing is, it's almost always friends or family who have passed before, or angels or dark figures. Never like a random dog, or a kid they never met, or a plate of spaghetti. The rational explanation: it's cultural. Even if you're not a believer, everyone hears stories about white lights, beckoning relatives, and spiritual figures. So that's what people see when their oxygen levels drop and their bodies are shutting down and they start hallucinating. The explanation that really unsettles me: someone with one foot in this world and one in the next can see things I can't. The scariest one was a man who seemed totally lucid. Normally, dying people don't make a lot of sense and will occasionally say something like, "My son is here. Do you see him?" And then go back to talking nonsense. This guy was otherwise in his right mind, except he was telling me about his wife who was sitting at the end of his bed. He said she had dyed her hair again, despite him always liking her natural gray. But at least she had on that blue dress she always looked so good in. He had a perfectly rational conversation with her about how he missed her. But the doctor said he would see her soon and not to worry. He wasn't scared. He knew he was a very old man, and no one lives forever. Part of me thinks he was just having a different experience of death or hallucination. Part of me thinks he was joking with me, but part of me believes she was really there. I just couldn't see her because I'm not dying. I always worried that one day I would be able to see what they see. Story 12. Context. My grandfather was a truck driver and taught me everything I know about driving, especially in the snow. I used to work at a drugstore, and one night I was closing another store in our chain when a snow squall unexpectedly dropped a few inches of snow in our area. I wasn't very familiar with the area, and I had my mom's car, so I wasn't used to that vehicle either. The snow was still coming down and I couldn't see well, so I was creeping home and panicking as I saw cars spinning out all around me. All of a sudden, I saw a light in my passenger side view mirror, and I turned my head. And sitting in the passenger seat, plain as day, I saw my late grandfather. I heard him say that he knew I wasn't freaked out by a little snow, and then I heard his voice rattling off all the things he taught me about driving in those conditions. I looked back toward the road, and then he was gone. It was a calming experience. When I saw him, it was more like, okay, Pop's here, I'm okay, instead of, oh no, you're supposed to be gone. I stopped panicking and got home without a problem. It was most likely just my brain, eyes, or whatever playing tricks on me to get me to calm down, but to this day it still gives me chills. Story 13. My grandfather died when I was in a very uncertain place in life. He didn't get to see me graduate college because I flunked out and worked dead-end jobs for 2 to 3 years before getting my act together. He ended up getting mesothelioma and went from being a fit and healthy older man to a frail figure clutching at his chest and gasping for air in the span of a month. I got to say my goodbyes before he was too far gone. I've always had a fear of hospitals, but I went in and saw him while he was still lucid, and I think he preferred I saw him like that rather than how my mom described his final nights. We had that kind of mutual respect for each other and sense of privacy. That man always thought I was smart, even when I was failing school and making terrible choices. I was always his granddaughter and treated with encouragement, F's on my report card or not. My grandparents' house was like a sanctuary when I was little. My mom had a lot of issues, and I lived through 2 divorces and countless out-of-state moves. But I could always count on my time with my grandparents to be peaceful. Until my grandmother's pain issues got really bad, and she found not so great ways to cope with it. He also technically wasn't my biological grandfather, since my mom was adopted. But it didn't matter. I'd go to their house, eat home-cooked meals, and play skip-bo with him until 10 p.m. when it was finally bedtime. So the point of that massive wall of text is this. I love my grandfather. He was a rock for me. When he passed, I was upset, but because he was in so much pain at the end, I was also relieved for him. He was taken too soon, but life is unfair. At least in that unfair end, he didn't suffer for long. After he passed, I started having dreams about him and their house. My grandmother had already passed by that point. In those dreams, we'd sit in the living room or at the kitchen table, and he would just talk to me about my life. I very distinctly remember a dream where he warned me to get away from the abusive boyfriend I was seeing at the time. As time went on, I got my act together. Now I live a relatively comfortable life. I'm not rich or wildly successful, but given the life I had, I beat some odds. There was a reason I failed out of middle school and other things. And as the years have passed, I've had fewer and fewer dreams about him. Now I don't dream about him at all anymore. My brother has had only one dream about him when he was about to graduate college. It was one of those, I'm so proud of you, dreams. It actually took me a long time to realize I don't dream about him anymore. I still dream about their house all the time, but now it's always empty. I had one single dream about my grandmother, and in it she was in the kitchen making dinner, her back to me, a pleasant memory of how she was in life. I think the one dream from my grandmother was her saying goodbye, but all those dreams about my grandfather were him watching over me. And as I got my life together, he realized he didn't need to anymore. So he either moved on or moved elsewhere. And that's why when I dream about their house, it's because I remember it as a safe haven. But now it's empty because they've moved on, which makes me happy and terribly sad at the same time. But if my grandfather was confident enough in me to believe I'd be okay, then I must be doing something right. So yes, I do firmly believe that loved ones can and do watch over people if they feel needed, and there was a strong bond in life. The logical explanation makes sense too, But sometimes it's okay to let yourself believe you were protected by something unexplainable, especially if it brings you comfort. Story 14. One time I drove back to college after Christmas, but before the winter break was over. So I was the first of my roommates to return to the house we were renting. Our house was in a pretty isolated spot on the outskirts of a town in upstate New York. I pulled into the driveway behind the house, went to the trunk, and grabbed one of my bags. Then I ran inside because I had to use the bathroom so badly. I'd been on the road for over 5 hours. I was inside the house using the bathroom for maybe 5 minutes. Afterwards, I went back outside to get the rest of my stuff from the car, and there were footprints in the snow all around it. Now, as I said, I was alone in the middle of nowhere. The only set of footprints should have been mine. From where I'd gotten out of the car on the driver's side, walked to the trunk, and then walked to the back door. Yet now there was another set of footprints circling the car, and then leading into the woods at the back of the property. It appeared that the footprints had originally come from the woods as well. I had left my trunk open when I went inside because I assumed I was alone and nothing had been taken. But someone had seen me arrive, come out of the woods, circled my car, and returned to the woods. I grabbed the rest of my stuff, locked my car, ran into the house, and locked the doors. Story 15. I moved into a cottage on the mountain. My backyard was a tree line. The moon lit everything so beautifully well, it hardly seemed like night at all. I began having recurring dreams. It was the same dream every single time. In my dream, I would see myself lying asleep in my bed, and then it switched from third-person view to first-person view. In the dream, I awoke to a whispering female voice. The thirst hit me. In the dream, it was unbearable. I would climb out of bed, open the French doors, and head to the kitchen sink to get a glass of water. As I neared the sink, the voice would get louder and louder, but I still couldn't make it out. It was as if it were a foreign language, but not one that I had heard before or since. Then standing in my kitchen and looking out the window right above the sink to the tree line in my backyard, well lit by the moon's light, the voice suddenly became clear. She said, "The devil is in the woods." At this point, a shadow darted quickly behind the tree line. I would then wake up from my dream, standing in my kitchen in the exact spot I was in during the dream. This happened almost every week for the entire duration of time that I lived in that house. It also always happened close to, or right at, 3 a.m. Story 16. When I was younger, my older cousin lived with us for a bit because she was having behavioral problems at home. My parents had to go at night to pick someone up from the airport, so they left my brother and me with her. My brother and I were both in bed in my room at this point. I think it was a school night, and she was up in the other room doing homework or something. But she finished up and came into my room to lay down with us. But as soon as she opened the door, our house alarm started going off. She quickly shut the door and came over to me to tell me to be quiet before going back to hold the door closed, since it didn't have a lock. My brother, who's older than me by a year, then woke up very confused about what was going on. So the alarm is going off. We're all scared out of our minds. And we can't even call for help because her phone had been taken away and we were too young to have one. Our only option was to get to one of the landlines. One was in the kitchen and one in my parents' bedroom. So we all got ready and, at the same time, ran to my parents' room and locked the door. My cousin checked their bathroom and closet to make sure no one was hiding in there before calling my parents to let them know what was happening. They said they were only 2 minutes away, so not to worry. But let me tell you, those were the worst 2 minutes of my life. After all was said and done, we found out through the alarm company that the window in my parents' room was what tripped the alarm, and that's the room we moved to. To this day, my parents are convinced she was just trying to sneak in a boyfriend or something. But I'm certain someone was trying to rob the place, or worse, and got scared off by the alarm, judging by how completely terrified my cousin looked. Story 17. Personally, I've had an extremely strange experience, and I don't know whether to chalk it up to my 12-year-old brain at the time or if it was actually something paranormal. My best childhood friend used to live in a house that was technically 2 old houses merged into one. The first night I ever slept over, he told me about how a woman who lived in one of the houses had lost her mind one day and drowned her children in a basin in the back, many years ago. It was around 4 a.m., and I woke up in the middle of the night needing a drink of water. I came out of his bedroom, past the staircase that led to the second floor on my right, and walked into the kitchen. On my way back to his room, for some reason, I stopped dead in my tracks at the foot of the stairs, which I hadn't really been looking at in my rush to get back. I turned my head to look at them, and instead of a staircase leading up to the second floor, there was a set of stairs going downwards at a steep angle, into what looked like nothingness. It was pitch black. I stood there for what felt like 20 minutes, just gazing into this abyss that was before me, an abyss that hadn't been there before. My brain didn't even register it as strange. That's when I heard an ear-piercing, and I mean, it sounded like it came from inside my head. Woman's voice scream, "No!" Needless to say, I booked it back to his room and haven't really said anything about it since it happened. The weirdest part is that I can remember it like it was yesterday, even though so many years have passed and I've probably forgotten about far more important things since then. Story 18. I was reading the Ars Goetia to get inspiration for a short story I wanted to write. Shortly after, I started hearing this jingle from my bedroom window in the middle of the night. There was nothing in the backyard or at the neighbors' houses that could have caused it, not even a wind chime. Then I woke up one morning and my grandpa's painting was upside down. Several days later, the knives were all turned the wrong way in the holder. Then the garbage can was backwards. And that kept going on and on. Most of it got explained. Turns out there was an archdiocese really close to our house, and the bells in the tower would go off if the wind was just right. And my significant other knows I like creepy things, so he did most of the turning household items backwards and came clean when I started getting scared instead of just having fun with it. The only thing that has no explanation is my grandpa's painting. My reaction to the painting is what made my SO decide to run with the rest of it, but he insists he did not turn that painting upside down. Story 19. About 4 years ago, we heard that my grandmother had fallen and hit her head and wasn't going to make it. We drove 4 hours south to see her one last time. My mom was distraught and was riding back with other family members. My sister had to drive us home. We were pulled off on the side of the road. I can't remember why, but we were waiting for cars to pass so we could make a U-turn. I turned around, looked, and saw a car approaching. My sister then said, "I am going to hit this car." I thought she was joking or messing around or something. Then as the car started to pass us, my sister hit the gas and swerved into it. Amazingly, we didn't actually hit it. That other driver had insane reflexes and swerved around us. Didn't even honk or stop. My sister instantly started to freak out and said she didn't see the car. I was confused. I told her what she said to me, but she had no memory of saying it. She burst into tears, saying again that she didn't see the car and didn't say anything like that. But my brother, who was in the back seat, confirms that we both heard her say it. To this day, we don't know what happened. She still swears she didn't say it or see the car. Story 20. My dad and I were talking about my grandfather one weekend. My dad lived with his parents at the time because money was tight. My grandfather was in the hospital for pneumonia and heart problems, which he was no stranger to. He had survived a few heart attacks already due to a mix of diabetes, prescription meds, and heavy drinking. We both heard what sounded like coughing coming from where his room was. It was late, and my dad, my sister, and I were the only people there. My dad and I were creeped out, to say the least. I joked that my grandfather had died and was now haunting the house. Not a minute later, the hospital called. My grandfather hadn't died. In fact, he was being difficult with the nurses and wanted to call to talk to my grandmother about something. I don't actually know what caused the coughing sound other than maybe us just hearing things, but the fact that the hospital called so soon after I made that joke was the creepiest part. Story 21. My best friend and I lived together in a 2-bedroom apartment during my senior year of college. We only had one key to our unit's mailbox, so we always left it on a little table right by the front door. A few months into living there, the key went missing. My roommate swears she remembers seeing the key on the table that day before leaving the house. She had an important piece of mail coming later that day that she really wanted to make sure she got. But when she came back from class, it was missing. We looked around the house for a few days, realized it wasn't turning up, and asked our landlord for a new key. We were confused about how it could just disappear, but accepted that one of us had probably misplaced it or accidentally taken it out of the apartment. A few weeks after losing the first key, we had a friend over for brunch, and she was putting some cinnamon rolls in the oven. All of a sudden, she asked, "Why is there a key in your oven?" Balanced perfectly across two wires on the middle oven rack, right in the center, was our old mail key. There is no way it could have fallen into this position. It had to be placed carefully there by someone. We had just made a frozen pizza on the same rack the night before, and it hadn't been there. We hadn't left the apartment between making the pizza the night before and making the cinnamon rolls the next morning. I still can't think of a plausible explanation, except that maybe my roommate was just messing with me. But seeing her face that day, I know she wasn't. Story 22. When I was 12, my family lived in a house that had a very large pond behind it. Think less of a pond and more of a very small lake. When we first moved in, the neighbor's son was always out at the pond fishing. When I talked to him, he swore there was a massive catfish in the pond. He really wanted to catch it but never could. He said he knew it was there because he had seen it eat some of the baby ducks and geese. He watched them get sucked down while swimming on the surface. I thought it was weird that a fish could eat baby ducks, but didn't think much more about it. Eventually, the neighbor's son moved away. He never did catch that catfish. After living there a few years, I was probably around 16, I finally saw what the neighbor's son had been talking about, or at least saw its effects. My friend was spending the night. We were just hanging out, playing video games all night on some random weekend, when we heard the ducks on the pond going absolutely wild. It was around midnight, and normally we didn't hear the ducks from inside the house, so we had to see what was going on. At first, we didn't notice anything. It just seemed like the ducks were freaking out for no reason. Groups of about 10 to 20 ducks would fly off the pond and then come back down, the whole time sounding panicked. Then we noticed it. Ducks were being pulled under. We watched as several ducks were dragged beneath the surface by something, and the ducks around that spot would freak out and swim away. It was insane. I've seen ducks dive for food before, and this was not that. These ducks were clearly struggling, wings and heads flailing as they were pulled down. It seemed like something was grabbing their legs. And let me clarify, these were not baby ducks. These were full-grown adult ducks, being pulled under and not resurfacing. The next day we told everyone, but very few people believed us. As these things usually go. We never saw anything like it again and stopped thinking about it. Until one night something else happened. It was a cool summer night, and I had the window open. I was playing a game on my Nintendo SP when I heard something outside. It sounded like someone with heavy, wet boots stomping through mud. I was sitting on my bed next to the window when I first heard it. Whatever it was, it sounded like it was walking down the fence line toward the pond. I jumped off my bed to look out the window. What I saw is hard to describe. At the end of our fence, about 20 feet from the pond, was a giant brown and black mass of something. The size of it was like a small car. It was rounded, kind of like Cousin It, with two shiny black eyes near the top. It was looking right at me. As soon as my eyes met its, I collapsed in fear. I've never felt anything like that before in my life. One time I almost died from car surfing, and the fear I felt then was nothing compared to this. I lay on the floor, unable to move or breathe, and listened as the creature walked to the pond. I heard splashing, and that was it. I lay there for what felt like hours, eventually climbed back into bed, and stayed awake in fear the entire night, just staring at the window. I have no idea what it was, but I think about it often. Story 23. The day my brother died, the home phone at my parents' house rang at about 2 p.m., and a horrible feeling of dread came over me. I knew I needed to answer the phone before my mother did. I answered it, and it was the local hospital calling to tell us that my 29-year-old brother was there and in cardiac arrest. I knew that meant he was gone, and if we wanted to see him, we'd need to go to the hospital immediately. So I told them we would come right away, got the information very quietly, and then had to go tell my mom and dad that their son had just had a massive heart attack. They hadn't been able to revive him, and we needed to get to the hospital. I have no idea how I knew something very bad had happened, but I just knew, as I was walking to the phone, that it was about my brother and that I had to be the one to answer it. Story 24. My family owns an adult foster care home for developmentally disabled adults. My family sleeps on the first level of the house, and the residents sleep on the second level above us. Ever since I was a little girl, I would wake up every single night at around 3 a.m. to the sound of furniture being dragged around on the floor above me. Like really heavy-sounding furniture, dragging in strange patterns. Of course, it freaked me out when I was younger, but as I got older, I just assumed one of the residents was moving their chair around. Maybe due to OCD or something. I wrote it off. Fast forward. I'm 17 years old and one of our residents moves out, so a much bigger bedroom than mine opens up upstairs. My current bedroom was a small office space, barely big enough to fit my bed, so obviously I jumped at the chance to move upstairs. I was excited and settled into my new room for the first night. Then I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of heavy furniture being dragged. On the floor above me, and I was on the second floor, the sound was coming from the attic. My house is infamous among friends and family for being haunted. There are so many stories I could tell. This one really gets to me because our attic is the scariest place I've ever seen, and sometimes I swear someone is living up there. Story 25. When I was a kid, I often dreamed about future events. Nothing major or specific, so I never actually believed I could see the future, but I'd bring it up in conversations here and there. It happened one last time, and then never again. I had a dream that I was walking home to my mother's house after visiting my father's. I had to walk through a really creepy Halloween-themed district, which doesn't exist in real life. I liked it because I love Halloween and stopped at a shop window to look at the bags and clothes. Suddenly, someone greeted me from above and introduced himself as Mr. Tom. I looked up and saw a guy dressed in a black suit and top hat, with long black wavy hair, dark circles around the eyes, and a white painted face. He had a monkey tail and fur on his hands and toes. He was sitting on a flagpole, looking down at me and laughing. Loudly he said, "Come in, come in." "Little girl, don't hesitate. Don't be shy. Take the chance. Come in and see." And something made me walk in, even though I was suspicious. The door closed behind me and the lights went out. I could only feel grass around me, and the air started to get cold and windy. I heard laughter. I heard monkeys. I heard big cats. Suddenly, a flash of light appeared in front of me, and another man in a suit and top hat appeared in the grassy area filled with light. He had short blonde hair. He told me not to be afraid, just to have fun. I tried to speak and explain that I was a little scared and confused, but no sound came out of my mouth. The light got brighter, and I saw creepy clown faces, tigers jumping around, monkeys screaming and laughing. I got dizzy, everything spun, and I blacked out, just to wake up in my bed. I went to school that day and totally forgot about the dream. Later at lunch, I got my dessert and was shocked when I looked closer. It was a Mr. Tom candy bar I had never seen before in my life. I had no idea it even existed. Please look it up. The packaging has clowns, monkeys, and tigers on it. To this day, I guess I might have seen it somewhere without remembering. But it still creeps me out that we got it as dessert the very next day at school. What a coincidence. I thought Mr. Tom was coming to get me, and I was scared to sleep for at least a week. I never dreamed about future events again. Story 26. In 2014, I was living in Southern California in a two-bedroom apartment on the second floor. Both my husband and I were Marines, but he was out on a boat for a few weeks, so I was home alone with our two cats. One night, around 1 a.m., I was woken by my cats making that horrible scared cat scream. You know the one, that high-pitched, unsettling sound. I opened my eyes and looked to the foot of the bed, where my cats usually sleep. They were both leaning to the right side of the bed, hissing at the left side. I followed their eyes and saw this enormous shadowy figure just lurking at the corner of the bed. I completely panicked and leapt out of bed on the far side, away from whatever it was. It took me less than a second to get up, but when I turned to face it, it was gone. My cats were now at the bedroom doorway, searching for it. I worked up the courage to investigate and found that whatever had been in my home was no longer there. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night, and my cats stood guard at the bedroom door for the next few nights. Now for the plausible explanation, I kept the balcony door slightly open for my cats to go use their litter box outside. It rarely rains in SoCal and the weather is great year-round. It could have been an animal, but what kind of animal is brave enough to walk into a bedroom where it smells humans and cats? The shadow I saw was large, crouched at the corner of my bed, just peeking up. It could have been a person, but I would have heard them run away considering how fast it disappeared. To this day, I have no idea what was in my room, and it still freaks me out. Story 27. Before my parents split up, we used to live in this huge old house. We stayed in that leaky place until I was about 14. The original plan was to renovate the nearly 100-year-old house, but I guess life got in the way. The house had 2 floors, and all of our bedrooms were upstairs. The largest part of the second floor was dominated by the attic. It was a creepy space filled with discarded things from both our family and the previous owners. I knew the attic pretty well, even though I was terrified of it. My best friend and I used to hide things we weren't supposed to have up there. A stolen baseball bat, fireworks, typical stuff 10 to 14-year-olds would hide from their parents. The attic had an old wooden door with a key in it. The door was always locked unless someone was inside. My bedroom shared a wall with the attic. I had insomnia as a kid, or at least the doctors told my parents that's what it was. One of my biggest secrets is that I slept with a nightlight on, hiding under covers and pillows until I was 14. I would strategize how I slept to make it look like the bed was empty, either by sleeping under the mattress or hiding my head under pillows. The reason? Almost every night, I would hear things shifting and moving in the attic. It often sounded like someone was rolling heavy balls, like bowling balls, across the floor. Sometimes there were knocks on the walls. Sometimes it sounded like whispers. My best friend and I would occasionally muster the courage to explore the attic during the day. Always with the door open, never alone. I became obsessed with finding the rolling balls I kept hearing. The other sounds I could write off as normal house noises. But the rolling and the whispers, those were different. We never found the rolling balls or anything else that could explain it. I'm sure there's a plausible explanation, but I never discovered it. I don't believe in the supernatural, but for some reason I still get scared thinking about that attic. We moved when I was 14, and the first night in the new place, I slept with all the lights off, head on the pillow. I've slept well ever since. I spoke to my mother about this a few years ago. When I told her about the sounds, she grew visibly unsettled and said she didn't want to talk about it anymore. Story 28. This didn't happen to me but to my sister and her husband just a few weeks ago. Someone rang their doorbell around midnight, and it sounded urgent. They knew their neighbor had been having heart problems, so they worried something had happened to him. Her husband ran downstairs to open the door, but as soon as he cracked it open, even just a little, some random man, not the neighbor, slammed into it, forced his way in, and shoved my brother-in-law into the wall. My brother-in-law tried to fight the guy off, but the intruder kept shoving him down and started making his way toward the stairs. My sister heard the noise, saw the man heading upstairs, where their bedroom and kids' bedrooms are, and grabbed a vase. She crept up behind him and hit him with it. Apparently, he wasn't expecting her at all, and it startled him enough for them to overpower him and push him back outside. They locked the door and called the police. Unfortunately, the police treated it as a lower priority call, probably because the man was now outside and the doors were locked. I understand that, but still, I'm appalled at how long it took them to arrive. It was reportedly around 45 minutes. They showed up about 5 minutes after the man left. But here's the terrifying part. That entire time, the man kept trying to get back into the house. He rattled the doorknobs, tried entering different codes on their electronic lock. He'd scream at them to let him in, go quiet, try to break the code, then speak in a calm voice trying to convince them to open the door. Then he'd scream again, then back off and cross the street to just stand there, staring at their upstairs windows. As soon as the lights went off, he'd come back to the door. This went on for 40 minutes. It sounded like something out of a horror film. They were especially disturbed because he seemed focused specifically on getting into their house, not just a random break-in attempt. And the fact that he made repeated efforts to get upstairs, where the kids were, only made it worse. I'm really grateful they're okay, but it's terrifying to think about what might have happened if things had gone differently. And it's frustrating that if the police had arrived just a few minutes earlier, they might have caught the guy. Story 29. When I was in my early 20s, my then boyfriend and I lived in an old house that had been turned into 4 apartments. We were in one of 2 units on the top floor. Our apartment was the only one with access to the attic, and the attic door was located in our bathroom, but it was painted shut. We figured the landlord didn't want anyone going up there. Naturally, we got it open and decided to check it out. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just an empty, dusty attic. We experienced many strange things during the 1.5 years we lived there. The scariest moment for me happened one night when I came home after closing at work. So around 1 a.m., I was home alone, changed clothes, did a few things, and headed to the bathroom before bed. As I was on the toilet, something slammed into the attic door hard enough to shake it in its frame. I don't think I've ever moved so fast in my life. I jumped up, ran out of the bathroom without even pulling my pants up, got dressed, and headed straight to my parents' house to spend the night. The next day, after calming down, my dad and I returned, thinking maybe an animal had gotten into the attic. We pried the door open and checked it out. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing in the attic to explain what had happened. And if something like an animal had been up there, we would have seen footprints or signs. It was completely covered in undisturbed dust. We used to hear dragging sounds and other strange noises in that apartment all the time. I even tried to research the history of the house by looking up the address, but I couldn't find anything unusual. Still, I never really felt comfortable in that place. Something always felt off. Story 30. When I was 8 years old, my room was on the second floor of our house, with the window facing the street. I liked that room because there was a street light right outside that made the whole room glow a pleasant orange color at night. And I was, and still am, terrified of the dark. One night I had stayed up reading. I had just discovered Percy Jackson, and I heard a rustling sound. At first I figured it was my cat, but she was asleep in the hall right outside my doorway. I realized the sound was coming from outside. I was terrified, but I couldn't not check. So I slowly sat up in my bed, rose onto my knees, and peeked out the window. There was a man in the flower bed, crouched in the lavender bush. He was wearing an old black hoodie and jeans, and his hands were so pale they glowed in the combined light from the lamp and the moon. I was so scared, but mostly puzzled. If someone was going to break into our house, wouldn't they go to the backyard, where there was no light at all? Not the front yard, directly below the open window of a brightly lit room. And he was facing away from the house, like he was watching the street for something. I ducked back into bed and covered my head with the blankets. He came back every night for the next 12 nights, always crouching in the lavender bush in the full glow of the streetlight. I don't remember why I didn't tell my parents. On the 13th night, as I watched him, he suddenly froze. He had been still before, but now he completely stopped moving, as if he were made of concrete. He slowly stood up. And he was tall. So tall. My bedroom window is at least 15 feet off the ground, and the top of his head almost reached the sill. But somehow his torso looked proportionate, like just his legs were absurdly long, or he was standing on a ladder. He slowly turned his head toward me and stared, except he didn't have a face. Not like blank skin or anything. It was just shadow under the hood. His face should have been lit from the glow of my room, but there was nothing. I could even faintly see the back of the hood through the darkness. Even though I couldn't see eyes, I felt them lock onto mine. It was like he crawled into my skin. My entire body felt wrong, like he poured the shadows into me. He raised his completely white hand, no fingernails, and made the shh gesture where a mouth should have been. Then he turned around and vanished. He didn't fade, he just wasn't there anymore. All these years I thought it was a recurring nightmare. I convinced myself he was a character I made up, or something from a book I read. But then, a month ago, he came back. I'm 20 now, living in a third-floor apartment. I had just finished studying math and went to close my window since it was past midnight, and the desert gets cold at night. And he was there, staring at me. Just as tall as he was 11 years ago, which meant his head didn't reach the window anymore. But still, he stared. That same molten dread filled my entire body. He raised his hand in the same gesture, and then he was gone. The next morning, still convinced I imagined it, I checked the bushes below my window. There were 2 columns of broken branches and crushed leaves where he had stood. Story 31. I was home alone one evening and had gone to sleep for the night. I live with my partner and 2 indoor cats, but she was out of state on a business trip. I woke up in the middle of the night, not sure of the time, but it was completely dark because my body was freezing cold. I usually like it cool when I sleep, and I typically keep the temperature around 70 degrees or lower since I live in Central Texas. But this was different. I was ice cold, even wrapped in blankets, and it was the middle of summer. When I grabbed my phone to check the time, it seemed to be off. I pressed the power button, but it didn't turn on. I was half asleep, so I shrugged it off. I walked out of the bedroom to adjust the thermostat and noticed the cats weren't around. This was weird because those 2 fur balls are usually always nearby. I reached the thermostat. It's a Nest, but it had no power. In fact, the whole house seemed to have no power. I peeked out of an upstairs window to see if my neighbors were having issues too, but all their outdoor lights were working fine. This all happened within the first 1 to 2 minutes of waking up. I went downstairs to get some water, but was startled by a soft glow coming from the first floor. The way my house is laid out, I couldn't see the light until I got to the top of the stairs. I found it strange. Power seemed to be out upstairs, but not downstairs. I started walking down the stairs and heard a faint humming noise. It was high-pitched, with random pulses of low sounds, like a muffled weed whacker being throttled at random. As I continued down, I spotted a dark, slowly moving figure in the room with the light. The next step I took felt like I walked off a cliff or got sucked into the floor. That's the only way I can describe it. I don't remember anything after that moment. I just lost all feeling in my body. My next memory is waking up to the sound of my phone's alarm. Everything seemed normal again. The cats were back in bed, lazy as ever. I sat there trying to make sense of the 2-minute experience from the middle of the night. I don't sleepwalk, and I was definitely not dreaming. Then I checked my home security app, which logs when doors open or close. The app showed the system was disarmed, and I definitely armed it before going to bed. It also showed the front door had been opened and closed several times during the night. I pulled up footage from my exterior cameras, but there was nothing. The motion sensors picked up a car driving by around 10 p.m., and then nothing until morning. Even more bizarre, I asked my neighbor across the street to check his security system. I made up a story about thinking someone might have broken into my truck. He checked, and same thing. His cameras also showed a gap in time. No activity. My first thought was sleepwalking, or that it had all been a dream. But then I remembered something. When I looked out the window in the middle of the night, I saw a red pickup parked the wrong way in front of the neighbor's house. I always noticed that because I've been ticketed for it. That truck wasn't there before I went to bed, verified on footage, but it was there in the morning, so I did see it in real time. Also, a few other things were off. The security system was disarmed. The light downstairs was on. I know I turned it off before bed. My whole body smelled like burnt marshmallows. I know that sounds weird, but it's the only way I can describe it. And my 55-gallon fish tank, which sits at the bottom of the stairs, was missing 2/3 of its water. That's over 40 gallons. The floor around it was bone dry. The fish were fine. I think I was mind-warped by some incredibly thirsty beings. That's honestly the only explanation that makes any kind of sense. Story 32. The company I work for owns the entire 9th floor in a building with multiple departments spread out, and nobody ever comes in on the weekends unless they get permission from one of the owners and sign a release form that's filed away by one of the production managers, me or a colleague. This past weekend, I came into work on a sound design project and to record some Foley I hadn't gotten around to. Since for all intents and purposes, I hold the keys to accessing the facilities on the weekend, I knew I was going to be the only person there. Sunday night, as I was walking down the hallway to my office from our recording booth to gather my things and leave, I heard what sounded like a moan behind me, near the elevators at the end of the hallway. Not a casual, content moan, but something more like a ghostly wail from a horror game. As soon as I heard it, I turned around and said out loud, "Nope, not tonight." After a few seconds, I started walking again. Then I heard it again, louder this time. At that point, I did a panic shuffle walk to my office, grabbed my stuff, and took the stairs all the way down to the first floor. I'm not superstitious at all, but I'm also not trying to be proven wrong by getting chased by some spectral voice in an elevator. Story 33. Several years ago, I had a Chow German Shepherd mix. She has since passed away. In all the years I had her, she never growled once and rarely barked. One night I was home alone while my spouse was away on a business trip. I was watching TV, and all of a sudden I heard a deep, intense growling sound. I looked over, and the dog had her snout pushed up against the crack in the front door and was growling so hard it sounded like a revving engine. Then she started doing those little warning yelps that dogs sometimes do right before they attack. This went on for several minutes. When she finally stopped, she stood there huffing, still with her snout in the door crack, then walked over and tried to jump into my lap on the couch, which was no small thing since she weighed 70 pounds. It felt like she was trying to protect me. It was the only time in her life I ever heard her make those kinds of sounds, and I was so freaked out I couldn't move. I've always hoped she just heard an animal on the porch, maybe a rabbit or raccoon. But sometimes I wonder if she scared off someone trying to break in. I miss her a lot. Story 34. When I was 18, I was attending university and renting a room in an old house a few blocks off campus. Only one other room in the house was rented, and the girl who lived there spent most nights at her boyfriend's place, so I basically had the whole house to myself. I would estimate that the house was built sometime between 1910 and 1920, based on the style and the neighborhood, but I could be wrong. I do know it was around 100 years old at the time. Definitely the oldest home I've ever lived in. It was my first time living alone, and since it was such a big, empty space, I spent most of my time in my room with the door locked. The house wasn't super creepy, but at night I avoided leaving my room unless absolutely necessary. It had the same uneasy feeling as turning off the basement light and running upstairs in the dark. Not because of anything specific, but because it made your heart race. Near the end of my first semester, I got influenza A. I'd always been pretty healthy up until that point, and it was the sickest I've ever been in my life. I could barely get out of bed to use the bathroom or feed myself. My whole body ached, and I had a very high fever. I even developed arthritis in my joints as a symptom, which I didn't even know was possible. At one point, I woke up with a puddle of sweat collected in the hollow of my throat. It was awful. A few days in, I woke up to see an elderly man sitting by the side of my bed. There wasn't a chair there, but he was clearly in a seated position. For some reason, I wasn't scared. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." I must have fallen back asleep because that's all I remember. It could have been a fever dream or a NyQuil-induced hallucination, but to me, it felt completely real. He was there, he spoke, and his presence was comforting. A few months later, a friend from another school came to visit. We explored the house and discovered a hatch to the basement. It was filled with old tools and hardware. But one thing stood out: an old medicine cabinet packed with vintage pill bottles, stuff like Anacin and other brand names I had to look up. There were also several prescription bottles too faded to read. The moment I saw the cabinet, the elderly man came to mind. I wondered if he had cared for someone sick and was drawn to me when I fell ill. I asked the landlord about the house's history, but they had only owned it for a few years and didn't know much. I'll probably never know for sure, but I still think about that moment often. Story 35. Last year, sometime around 3 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. When I walked back into my room, I saw something standing next to my bed. It was black, kind of fuzzy around the edges, and bent at weird, unnatural angles. I got this overwhelming sensation, almost like an internal voice, that told me I wasn't supposed to see it and that I needed to leave immediately or I'd be in danger. So I did. I grabbed some water, stalled for a bit, and then returned to my room. I had a book on my bed with me earlier, and when I came back, it was on the floor. That made it hard to dismiss what I saw. I couldn't just chalk it up to imagination. I told myself it was our black cat and tried to go back to sleep. Now, of course, it could have been the cat, but I'm pretty sure she was locked in with my parents that night. And yeah, I have experienced auditory hallucinations before, but that was years ago, back when I was a teenager and they were adjusting my medications. And those only ever happened when I was just about to fall asleep, never when I was fully awake or upright. I've never had strong intuition. I'm basically one step above the kind of kid who walks into a suspicious van labeled free candy and puppies. So why I would suddenly develop this strong, primal sense of danger, strong enough to physically remove me from a space, is what really unsettles me. Even if I was just tired and mistook the cat for something else, that deep, gut-level get-out-now warning still sticks with me. Story 36. When I was a kid, my family used to drive to an old seaside village where we'd spend the entire summer. The village was known for having a lot of abandoned houses, usually because the owners had passed away and no relatives could be found to claim them. The house next to ours had been completely abandoned since before we moved in. The doors and windows were all boarded up, and the place had clearly been untouched for at least 10 years. One summer, my cousins and I thought it would be fun to pry open the wooden boards and peek inside. We managed to crack one of the boards just enough to get a view through the window, and to this day, I'll never forget what I saw. The window looked into a bedroom, and since the door was open, we could see a good portion of the rest of the house, and it was spotless. Not a speck of dust. The beds were made. Everything looked clean and untouched. The ceiling fan was on. There was even a prayer carpet neatly laid out on the floor.